My name's Kathy Bissell. Welcome to the Golf Show 2.0. Today we have as our guest a gentleman who's been probably an award winning, I'm going to say he is because he has been writing for such a long time and was a successful writer for the New York Daily News and the New York Post, Hank Gola. And he has a new book on the Ryder Cup. Gary, why don't you pepper him with some questions?
Pepper away, Gary.
Pepper away. Salt. Well, we're salt and pepper now at this point.
Yeah.
Although I
Yeah.
wish I had a little more salt.
Some of us are.
You got it going. Hank, tell us about the book, the title, and why you decided to write it.
Well, the title's Ryder Cup Rivals, and I basically picked out what ended up being the 13 most consequential Ryder Cups in history. And we wanted to get it out before this year's Ryder Cup at Bethpage. And I found basically a couple of threads that ran through all the Ryder Cups, and one was just the gamesmanship and all of that it was there from Walter Hagen on, and it seemed to be in every Ryder Cup. And
the fans, from my history research, the fans have behaved badly, really on both sides of the Atlantic since day one.
Not only, that's good there. That's good there.
Have been, what's the old joke? Sore losers and worse winners.
Yeah, I mean, it has raised its so-called ugly head many times, and it's funny. Now, in '99, you were there. I was there, Brookline, and that was the tremendous U.S. comeback on the last day. And of course, the Europeans were all up in arms, and I know they should not have stampeded over Ollie's line on 17. I happened to be right there, kneeling at the back of 17. And just a sidelight on this, that whole stampede was started by the American wives.
Yep.
And they just, I mean, I won't name her, but she was kneeling next to me, and she took off like she was Jesse Owens out of the starting blocks. And I mean, it was, everybody just followed, and the whole thing turned into chaos. But my point was, they were complaining about the behavior of the American fans, and yeah, they were Boston fans are pretty passionate. We all know, and they'll probably be passionate in New York again this year. But I always said, like Mark James, like, why didn't you just take your entire team to Fenway Park and stick them in the bleachers, like, a couple of weeks ahead of time at a Yankee series or something like that, and then you'll get a kind of preview of what's in store for you. I mean, they were like surprised by this, that Boston fans would act like idiots. Hey, that's what it is.
Well, and it served as the perfect smokescreen. Instead of talking about how their team lost and fell apart and what a terrible choices Captain Mark James made, they went off on the Americans and never mind that their team fell to pieces.
Yeah, they did. They just, well, first of all, they came to Brookline with they were outmatched, and they had
and three of their guys they were so bad they didn't even play until Sunday, which is got to be a first.
He just tried to hide him. He tried to send his horses out and try to.
Well, but that's what they always did. Year after year.
That was their strategy. Yep, you're right. So and then it just felt like dominoes. Once it started, it was an avalanche.
Well, that's why they send their big guns out early, right? They want to knock off a few people. And...
Well, yeah, that was it. Even when they going back to Faldo and Lyle and Seve, of course, that was always their strategy, because the Americans always had more depth.
Yeah, they had their big six, and they played them all 5 matches, and that's how they got close. Mm-hmm. So you got the idea for the book really because you knew the Ryder Cup was coming up in New York, or
because my publisher called me and said
unexplored information in the history that you could bring.
My publisher, Chris Solavic, called me and said, "You want to do another book?" I said, "Not really."
Said, remember the part where I said I retired, Chris?
He said, "I'll give you a bigger advance this time." I said, "Okay." What the heck? I'm not doing anything else. No, and then we kicked around some of the ideas, and David Barrett had already done a kind of similar thing with the Masters, but he did every Masters.
Of course, that's a lot.
Of course, yeah. And I said, the Ryder Cups coming up at Bethpage might be an idea to pick out the best Ryder Cups and just take deep dives into them. So that's what we did. And I love research. That's the one thing I love to do is research and dig into things and old articles and just kind of uncover buried treasure. And that's what I did with my previous book, which is about a high school football game. So there was a lot more available, obviously, on the Ryder Cup. But yeah, it was really cool just finding out all this stuff. That
What was it hard to whittle your list of interesting Ryder Cups down to a manageable amount?
Well, the reason we settled on 13 again is that the book was getting too long. I wanted a couple of more in there. I wanted to go to 15, and I had a couple more in mind. But then, okay, well, we'll just settle on this. But yes, it was, and I mean, the one thing was like, did this set a crossroads for the ride? Did this change anything about the Ryder course? Set it on a different course? So, I mean, we've got 1947 in there, and 1947 at Portland was a complete blowout. I think it was 11-1. Hogan was the captain. And the reason that's in there is because both the U.S. and the U.K. were coming out of the World War II, and the U.K. economy was devastated because of the war, and the U.S. economy picked up because of the war, because of all the wartime production. And that kind of separated. That was kind of the reason why the U.S. became dominant for so many years, because they were while England was fighting the war. I mean, we eventually got involved in it. Their golf was on hold. I mean, Turnberry was, had anti-aircraft,
landing fields and all that.
Exactly. And the Americans were just carrying on. I mean, they were still producing golfers at a rapid clip, and that kind of set it apart for a while. And then, of course, the U.S. was dominant for so many years, and Jack had to bring Europe into the fray, and we know what happened after that.
Well, World War II really decimated an entire generation, at least, of European men, and really wiped out whole entire areas. And without the Marshall Plan, I guess it would still be rubble, perhaps. I mean, it was just, an awful looking situation from the photographs, newsreels, and everything you see. So they were lucky to get out of it, period, and be able to start building back.
You were just a young girl then, right?
Gary makes jokes about my age.
But you're right. If it wasn't for this guy, Robert Hudson, who was like the Piggly Wiggly magnate of Oregon, and who was just a tremendous golf fan, he basically saved the Ryder Cup, because the Brits didn't have money to come over here, and he basically paid for all the expenses of the British team. And that was how the Ryder Cup was allowed to continue. Otherwise, that would have been the demise almost. And we wouldn't be talking about it, and I wouldn't be have written this book.
It's funny, the stuff you're talking about, finding treasure when you do research. Mm-hmm. I've looked up Ryder Cup stuff, I don't know how many times. It just occurred to me, I know Samuel Ryder's a seed merchant. So I looked up, I was going to ask you, what's your favorite kind of seed that he sold? But the real secret to his success it wasn't what kind of seeds. He invented the penny packet. And, they had victory gardens and all that stuff during the war, but they loved their flowers and their plants over there. And he invented the penny packet. Yeah. He was kind of like the Walmart or the Costco ahead of his time, selling in great volumes cheaply. And that's how he made his fortune. A penny at a time. It's incredible.
Well, they had these grand gardens at all these estates and manors. They had these gardens, and what he did was he brought them to the common man, and gardens, like backyard gardens, started sprouting up all around the UK. So he was also very he was a big patriot, obviously, and he donated a lot of his seeds to the World War I Medical Corps. Whatever they needed in that respect, he provided. So he was, he was a big guy with the Union Jack. That was it. and he wanted to defend British honor, basically. So he extended what he did in the war to taking on the U.S. and proving that the UK was still the golf power in the world.
Was there a Ryder Cup that either was one of your favorites for any reason, or there was one where you uncovered a lot of treasure you didn't know about and were surprised by.
Well, the first one was cool. I didn't know much about that, but Walter Hagen, and he put together a really cool kind of a they were like eclectic group of golfers, and they had some like Leo Deagle. Do you know much about Leo Deagle, right? He had he had a putting style that was arms akimbo, but he was probably the first guy to employ the pendulum stroke. Everybody else pretty much was jabbing at the golf ball on the greens, and he had his arms splayed out, so his elbows were sticking out this way, because he couldn't putt, so he went to that. He had the yips, so he went to that to prevent the yips, and it eventually becomes like the way to putt. So that was kind of interesting. And there were some other. There was actually the pro at my golf. I'm a member at North Jersey, and one of the pros at North Jersey was on that team. He was on the first two Ryder Cup teams, Johnny Golden. And not many people know about him. Walter Hagen loved him as a partner because Hagen was all over the place, and Golden was pretty straight. So Golden could find the fairways an alternate shot and spare Hagen from hitting a few drives, because it was all alternate shot back then. They only played that. I forgot when four balls was introduced, but it wasn't until well into the Ryder Cup it started. For the most part, they played alternate shot and then singles. So Hagen valued him as a partner, and Golden would have had a much better career, except he caught pneumonia on the train heading down to play in Florida, because they always started the tour. Everybody went down to Florida early and played, and he passed away at, I think it was very early, maybe age 32, 33.
Wow.
Johnny Golden might have been a bigger name than he was. So that was kind of interesting to me.
They didn't
And
have
37
antibiotics.
was cool too, because 37 was Snead and Nelson were basically rookies. And Hogan had not yet come into his own, so Hogan wasn't on that team. But the third guy of that triumvirate was Ralph Guldahl, who was the Open champ, and they pretty much dominated when they went over there. And the Brits didn't expect them to adapt to the conditions very well, but they did. And again, they came back complaining about the behavior of the British fans, especially Guldahl's wife. She was very vocal, and she really started a big stink, and they had to apologize, and they went back.
When you're researching these old events, obviously it's not on the internet. How do you research, say, the 37 Ryder Cup or the 33? You go to microfilm, New York Times library. How do you even find that stuff?
Well, here's the thing. So when I did my first book, City of Champions, back in 2018, a lot of these newspapers weren't digitized. So I actually had to go to a lot of libraries up and down the coast and look at the microfilm readers, right? So that'd be tough on the eyes.
Yeah, it is. You'll have a headache after a couple hours of that, he said from experience.
But now, luckily, newspapers are all digitized. There's a
Really?
website in particular, newspapers.com, where you just put in some search terms and you can pretty much find anything you want. So research becomes a little easier than it was for my first book. You still have to dig. You still have to know what you're searching for.
Yes.
But it's out there. And and again, the British papers are also online too, which was very helpful, because I could get their side of the thing too, especially in the early days.
Well, I always felt like Denny Shute didn't get his due as being a Ryder Cup goat, because it was early on in the Ryder Cup, and he had a 15-footer for birdie to win the Ryder Cup for the team, 2 putts for par to have the cup, and then he gunned his first putt 4 feet or 5 feet past, missed it. He 3-putted to lose the Ryder Cup. Can you imagine that happening now?
No, but he didn't know that. He didn't know. He thought
he didn't know the situation.
He didn't know it was a 2-putt to win. He thought it was a 1-putt. That's why he gunned his first putt. And Walter Hagen. That's funny, because Walter Hagen, where was that played? SNA. That was played at SNA. And Walter Hagen was in the clubhouse entertaining the Prince of Wales.
That's right.
And he wanted to get out there to tell Denny the situation, and he couldn't get away from the Prince of Wales. And they had this big, I guess it was a big bay window that they were watching out. So they watched. So Hagen had to watch his guy 3-putt to lose the Ryder
The
Cup.
Prince of Wales basically won him a Ryder Cup.
He did, and but of course that's the guy who abdicated.
Right.
he was big for a little bit. So yeah, so he had certain parts in history that
another one that we've forgotten about in this side, and I don't off the top of my head remember if this is in your book, but is it 53? Peter Allis was one. Was he even in a match? He stubbed a chip late in the match, and maybe they were even, and he wound up losing to Jim Turnisa, and Brits lost by only a point in a rare close Ryder Cup in 53. And Peter Allis said, he lived with that his whole life. It bothered him his whole life.
It did, yeah. And
well, that's what happens in Ryder Cup. Bernard Langer at Cuba. I mean, he had to live with that forever.
But Bernhard actually ended up handling it well. It didn't torment him at all.
He won the next week in Germany, if I recall.
But he had, he was a great believer in faith, and he kind of figured, well, that's what it was.
The bigger question was, did somebody throw Hale Irwin's ball back into the, out of trouble on that last hole? Because I think it hit Kathy Jordan of the PGA of America in the back.
In the back.
And then there's conflicting reports that somebody, not anybody from the PGA of America, but a spectator may have changed position of that ball. Did you get into that much? The foot wedge.
It hit her in the back. Yeah, foot wedge. As far as I know, it hit her in the back and bounced into the fairway. She was actually escorting the head of the PGA, who was it at the time, with the Ryder Cup trophy.
Was it Autry?
No, it wasn't Autry. It was Autry. No, I'd have to go back and look. But and she was, and that's the reason she was out there, bringing the trophy to the up to the 18th hole for the presentation.
What's your favorite Ryder Cup? It can be your favorite for any reason, because it had a great finish, or
well, I mean, the ones I covered. I mean, 99. There's nothing to compare with 99. I'm sorry, that's cliche, but the atmosphere there was incredible, and you could just feel the momentum change, and that's what's really cool about a Ryder Cup. Unfortunately, the ones in Europe are sometimes the blowouts, and you don't get to that. I mean, it's just a kind of a slog to the finish for the Americans. But 99, and then of course Ben Crenshaw wagging his finger at Olaf, and we're saying this guy.
I have a feeling about this.
Yeah.
Those guys are boarding the bus. We were forced to stand there in a penned-in area outside the clubhouse, and all these guys who are our good friends. Nothing, hey, Colin Morikawa, listen to this. All these guys who talk to us all the time, Payne Stewart, Tom Lehman, they all walked. We needed a quote Saturday night on deadline, and they wouldn't even look at us. They got on the bus, and
they didn't have
kind of the beginning and the end of Ryder Cup access.
Well, they didn't have to really, because what Ryder Cup access.
Yeah. Actually,
terrible.
Kia was kind of the beginning of the end of being able to walk around and talk to people.
Yeah, I mean, you're just going to get the people you would normally just chat with off the cuff every time.
It was slammed with fans for the first time ever at a Ryder Cup, because I went to the one I don't know what the European ones are like, but my first Ryder Cup was 87 at Muirfield Village. Does that sound right? And there was next to nobody there. And I only went because Landmark was holding the Ryder Cup at the time. We thought it was going to be at PGA West in 1991, because that's where it was originally supposed to be. And then through a lot of different, takes too long to explain how it got to.
Read the book. I explain it.
Okay, well, I know what it is, so I'll tell you whether or not your explanation's right. I may have some secret background information.
Okay, well, I should have consulted you. I didn't realize that.
Yeah. Do you still have some logo merchandise from the Ryder Cup that never was, Kathy?
No, but I think Bob Verdi has a shirt. Who else may have had a shirt? George Sweeta may have had a.
George
He's
Sweet
made
had a
away.
free shirt from
Wow.
everybody on
We're
earth.
talking about some of the greats in the game right there.
Yeah.
I'm
But,
serious. I mean, those were the days.
so
What was the toughest one you had to research that you had the hardest time finding good information on?
Probably the Belfry, Sevy's when Sevy kind of came into his own. What was that? 85 at the Belfry. Stadler's missed putt that turned that one around. And
Yeah.
back in the Kathy, you mentioned 87, nobody being there. That was Jack. Obviously, Jack was the captain that year, and he wasn't very happy about losing. But I don't believe there was a television contract until.
Yes, there was. Well, it wasn't.
Was that the first one?
That was, I think, the first one, and they were having a hard time figuring out what to do with it because you never knew where the matches were going to end, and that was the problem with the Ryder Cup.
Yeah.
Right. Well, they wanted to at one point they wanted to change it to stroke play in '69, and they put the kibosh on that because then at least all the matches would finish on.
Yeah, you'd know how they ended. Yeah, and that would kind of defeat the purpose of how crazy the Ryder Cup is anyway.
Yeah.
Well, I thought you did a great job of bringing that atmosphere, that feeling of the Ryder Cup, which is hard to put into words, but you were able to do that. I mean, the one scene that sticks with me, and there's a lot of them over the years. I covered the one at Glen Eagles that wound up being where Phil threw everybody under the bus.
That was
my
question,
I remember is
yeah,
I remember riding the shuttle bus up there. I decided to get up really early, take the early bus like at 6 a.m. I'm there at 6:30. I mean, it's still pitch dark out. I get off the bus wherever they drop us off on the grounds, and I hear this humming, this noise, and I'm like, what is that? So I walk a little closer, and I realize here it is at 6:15 or 6:30 in the morning. It's singing. The stands at 1 are already full of people. They're already there, and they love to sing at soccer games. It's part of their culture. I mean, they were singing and having a party, and I thought, this week is not going to end well. Look at these. I mean, that's the feeling of the Ryder Cup, the atmosphere that you can't duplicate it anywhere. It's the only tournament where everybody cares about every shot, as I've said many times. But they were singing it probably I don't know when the gates. I don't even know if they went home. They might have been there all night.
Probably not.
It was. I mean, I get goosebumps just thinking about that. Like, wow, that is what the Ryder Cup is. And
absolutely,
you had the challenge of trying to put that into words. Good luck. I thought you did a good job.
Thank you.
Well, let's go back to, I think you kind of glossed over the fact that Hank asked Phil Mickelson the question about why wasn't.
Yeah, it was a very.
I'm sorry, I stepped on you on that. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, tell us about that.
It was a very simple question, and I wrote about this in my introduction. But when you're over there, one of the cool things is, but you work for a magazine, so you had time anyway. But for us newspaper grunts, you had the luxury of deadlines being, you could take all night to write your story. So you could kind of formulate your column and your main story in your head. So I knew what angle I wanted to pursue, and it was a very simple question. I said, anyone who was at Valhalla, what went right in 2008, and what's gone wrong since? And Phil jumped on it. I mean, he was just waiting.
He is waiting. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, I just threw the bait out there, and he just took it. And I mean, yeah, he did throw Watson under the bus. But the one problem I had was when you ask Phil a question, is there a reverb or something I hear?
We're getting all of a sudden an echo showed up.
Is somebody sabotaging this podcast?
It's Phil Mickelson. He's after us.
So when you ask Phil a question, he makes eye contact with you, and he just locks on your eyes, and he answers your question, right? So I asked the question. I think I was up in one of the first two rows, and now and all I wanted to do was see how everybody else was squirming up there, because I could just imagine the rest of the team and what was going through, and especially on Watson. But I wasn't unable to do that because I had to keep looking at Phil. But apparently they were squirming. And then somebody came back, if you remember, guys, and asked Furyk, like, well, Furyk, what, Jim, what do you think of that? He was in no mood to continue the conversation.
I was sitting in the second row, and I look in the first row, and there's Raymond Floyd sitting, I think, next to Steve Stricker, and Phil throwing everybody Watson under the bus, and I'm in there and like, why would you do this in a press conference?
Yeah.
Steve Stricker looks at me, and I mouth the words like, what, and he just looks at me. He shook his head, and then he wouldn't look at me again after that. It's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. But I didn't know he was gonna give me gold.
Nobody did.
It's like, wow.
But that started the whole controversy of how Ryder Cup captains are selected and when the teams are picked and how many picks should we have, and all that kind of stuff got rearranged after your question.
Yeah, the famed task force.
Yeah, and that turned out to not work either.
Not really, no. I mean, they won their next two at home, but they still haven't won something on the road.
I mean, Keegan Bradley, I think his captain is a makeup call because he got left off, and because he rightly pointed out that captains are picking their friends or members. Well, let's just leave it. They're picking their friends over maybe some deserving players.
Yeah.
And so now the whole task force thing got shot out of the water because it was, a good old boys club all of a sudden. So I don't know. Paul Azinger broke the code. He had the pods, all that psychological profile, and it worked brilliantly. And they've never gone back to do it a second time. It's incredible.
They've never done it. No, they've never done that. Right. So the year Sergio blew the Open at Carnoustie, remember that?
Yeah.
And he started blaming the entire world, and the guys who were raking the bunkers were responsible. They took too long and all of this, and he was getting bad bounces, and he was hitting sticks, and he should have stuck at the 2 feet. And
God is against them. Everybody.
Everyone was against him. He was playing against more than the field, I think he said.
That's what.
So we're at the airport going home, and Zinger happens to be there. It was me and a couple of writers, and we're just shooting the what, and start talking about Ryder Cup, and he says, he saw that Sergio had just totally blown up, right? And he basically said, we got to get in Sergio's head. And I think once we do that, he's the key. Once he falls, the rest of the roster will fall. Okay. And he was right, because if you remember the singles match, he was out first, and Zinger specifically picked Anthony Kim to take Sergio down.
Right.
And man, did he ever! I mean, the first hole, I remember following that match, and he got to the first hole. I think he had very similar putts, maybe 2.5 feet each. And Sergio says, "Good," and Kim says, "Let's putt him." And he set the terms of the match, and he just went on to just obliterate him.
My recollection is by about the 7th hole, Kim had pretty much had a stranglehold on that match. Yeah.
And of course, we talk about how the British press, as you know, is. I mean, they were homers. Obviously, they would always erupt in applause every time a blue point went up on the board.
Yeah.
The whole their side of the press room would go crazy, and we're like, "What the hell? We're not rooting for our guys. We don't mind if you guys win." But they were just so. I mean, every point. But the exception to that rule was the year Faldo was captain in 2008.
Yeah,
they had such bad feelings for Faldo that. They didn't care, and they ravaged him after that. When it was Captain Cockapoop, whatever they say, but that was him. And at the end of that chapter, I go through a litany of Faldo takedowns, and so that was interesting, because Zinger ended up being the perfect captain, and Faldo ended up being the worst captain ever.
He didn't have the greatest team.
No, he didn't.
But on the other hand, you lost to a team with Boo Weekly on it, so I don't know. What's that?
Yeah, true.
If you're watching this Boo Weekly, I apologize. You were pretty good once upon a time. So.
And now he's on the Champions Tour.
What's the one nugget? Somebody's picking up your book. What page should they turn to first to read the coolest nugget in the book? You don't have to leave the page number in there, but
No, I don't. I can't recall it. Wait, hold on a second. Oh, that's the wrong book.
well, he's written so many books, you can't keep them straight. Another good book.
It was a good book. Yeah, if you're interested in high school football, it is a good book. Let's see. I found interesting. Probably people know this. You probably know this, but the whole thing about Steve Pate and the accident.
Yes.
On the way to the dinner, to the Ryder Cup dinner.
Gala, however you say it.
And then of course it ends up like they thought that it was very shady that Steve Pate couldn't play the last day, and they had to rearrange the singles. But just all of that stuff, all of that intrigue that happened at the dinner, starting with Pate, and of course the Americans, they put up a highlight film, a Ryder Cup highlight film, and it was all American highlights, and it really ticked off the Euros. And
of course it did.
So,
well, they showed a picture of Steve Pate's ribs and stuff, and he was all black and blue. I remember seeing that.
Well, he tried to play a match, though. I mean, he did go out and play one. That's what made him suspicious.
Yeah, right. And they saw him hitting balls the day before, and they said he was perfectly fine. But Pate said that he had to change his swing after that, and he was never the same again.
Wow.
So he said, he said it wasn't a minor thing at all.
There was also the Ryder Cup where Sam Torrance somehow had a toe injury for the singles match, which either happened when he'd had a few too many drinks, or I don't know if we know the story on that really either.
Like I said, there was always something going on. I mean, 1957, the big upset at Lindrick, when they sent over a very mediocre team, the Americans, because, for instance, Carey Middlecoff wasn't on that team because he didn't play in the PGA that year.
Okay.
And if you had to play in the PGA, otherwise you were going to make the Ryder Cup team. That was some of the stuff that was going on. And
so, Hank, the Ryder Cup's in your backyard. What are you doing during Ryder Cup week this year?
Hopefully I'll be there. I got to get a credential. I'm asking the Daily News to send me, but you know how things are.
Yes.
The sports editor would love to send me and would love to have me there. And of course, the higher ups who run have their fingers on the purse strings may not be as amenable. So I'm waiting to hear from them. I'm not confident, but if I don't, I'll get a credential. I'll be out there. I'm sure. Maybe not every day, but I'll be out there.
It's a weird event to write about because so much happens so fast that you can't. The morning matches get overtaken by the afternoon matches, and stuff that was important at noon is not important at 5 o'clock, and it's very difficult to cover. I think is too much play. The one thing I do like about the President's Cup is it's over 4 days instead of 3, but it's a hard event for to write about for a daily. While there's nothing but daily now.
Well, also you have to set up the next day's play.
Yeah.
So you're doing in advance a bull lead, a sub, all at once. It is correct. You're right.
It's a lot.
All right. So where can people find your? I'm sorry. Where can people find your book, Hank? Is it going to be in stores already, or Amazon?
July 15th is the release date, and it can be pre-ordered on all the sites like Amazon. Barnes and Noble, Thrift Books. Thrift Books has already discounted it. I'll give people a little. It's down to $25 on Thrift Books.
Come on!
If you want to save $7, go to Thrift Books. And then
how many books do you have to sell? How many books do you have to sell to get a bonus?
Well, I don't know. I think we've set a first printing, very modest first printing. And actually, it's really good because my publisher, well, I won't say it's my publisher. There was a mistake made. And he's gonna hate me for saying this. Chris, I'm sorry. I apologize in advance for doing this. But there's a mistake on the back cover, and Ryder Cup is misspelled. It's spelled R-I.
Yeah.
So luckily, Chris didn't put out that many books in the first edition. We were just waiting to see how it would work out, and it's going to work out good because now we can correct that error in the second edition.
Okay, that's good.
So yeah.
Well, hopefully it's not like
Edit that out. By the way, edit that part. Chris,
Yeah.
I didn't say that.
Hopefully it's not like John Garrity's book about America's worst golf courses, and the whole first printing went missing. They got wound up in some warehouse somewhere that nobody knew where they were there, and they couldn't find them. So that
Wow.
really hindered sales.
I bet. No, other than the overlook the back page error and buy the book. It's I'm very proud of it.
It may be worth more.
And take note of the blurb on the front cover by
Brilliantly written blurb on the front cover. You're going to want to see that.
Yeah.
And this guy knows golf because
Van Sickle.
Hank and I are the two nuts in the golf media who really insist on playing golf all over the place. We've both played a lot of courses. I'm over 1,500, but Hank, your number is huge. What are you like?
Well, I'm trying to get to 1,000 still. I'm in the 900s, but yeah,
you're not that, which is 900 is an absurd number. I'm on a website, and you are too, an app, Golf Played, and there's a couple of guys over 2,500, and you're going, how do there's apparently they're traveling salesmen, which I guess is probably the best job.
Yeah, that would be the best way to do it.
Anybody who's played 100 golf courses, you've done a lot.
Yeah,
and Hank has played over 900, going for 1,000, and
947. I think I'm at
that's
right
pretty
now.
good.
I've slowed down, obviously. I'm not.
Well, when you need to come to Pittsburgh and play a half a dozen mediocre public courses fast, I'm your guy.
We'll knock them off. Okay.
You can stay here and we'll play golf.
One thing I didn't mention is that I was the captain of the U.S. Media Ryder Cup team 5 times. Had a 4-1 record, and you might have played in my team at Glen Eagles, Gary.
I did, yeah.
Yeah, and of course we won that one as well. And I think Tom Watson had his first press conference on Tuesday, and I brought our trophy in, and I sat it in front of him, and I said, "Tom, we got ours."
I'm sure he was amused.
He certainly was. I think he said, "Congratulations." But yeah, so that was a big moment, and that's basically the biggest American triumph that week was us winning.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Ryder Cup Rivals by Hank Gola. You're going to want to read about the Ryder Cup. Bone up on your history before Bethpage this year in September. Thank you, Hank Gola.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. We had a great time.